Hello there, my name is Kjartan and I am honoured to welcome you here to my home. So, you have arrived at a fine time as I'm going to be telling one of my favourite sagas this evening. Now, I fancy myself as a bit of a skald after all. What's that? You don't know what a skald is? A skald is a poet, a storyteller, a person who keeps the histories and the memories of our people alive. Now, the saga I shall be telling you is one of the classics. This is going to be the Saga of Refr The Sly. Our saga begins during the days of King Håkon the Good, foster son of King Athelstan of England, far away from Jorvik, across the Northern Sea in Iceland. In the Breiðafjörð district, on a farm in Quenabrekka, there lived a man named Stein and his wife Thorgeir. Now Stein, he was a wealthy and accomplished farmer, and he had only one child who was the hero of our saga. His name was Refr, which I'm sure you know. In our language, that name means fox. Now Refr was a handsome lad. He was strong, he was big for his age, but very difficult for his parents to manage. In fact, he was quite a disappointment and embarrassment to his parents. Unlike his hard-working mother and father, Refr was a lazy boy. He spent all his time lazing about by the fire at home, doing no useful work, getting in the way of other people. He wouldn't even play outside with others his own age. His parents felt they were so unlucky that their only child was so lazy and so unwilling to behave like a normal person. Most folk in Breiðafjörð thought that Refr was a fool. They named him a coalbiter, a coal biter. As I'm sure you know, this insulting nickname labelled him as lazy, unsociable. He'd rather spend his days wasting time by the fire biting coal than working or playing outside. But besides all this, the family lived a really good and happy life, until one day a new neighbour arrived. His name was Thorbjorn. He was a great fighter, he was wealthy, but he had a terrible reputation as an ójafnaðarmaður, an uneven man, prone to arrogance, overbearing behaviour, who thought way too much of himself. He'd lived in every single part of Iceland, but was expelled by the chieftains and his neighbours due to his rough, unfair nature and his terrible, violent manslaughters. He killed men for little reason and never paid compensation to their families. Thorbjorn's wife was named Randveig. She was a domineering woman who drove Thorbjorn to commit these outrageous deeds. Thorbjorn had bought farmland in Breiðafjörð at Saudavel Mountain, which now meant he was neighbour to Refr's family. Thorbjorn's bad reputation was well known to everyone, and they were all apprehensive about his coming. Now, Refr's family farm was divided from Thorbjorn's by a shallow river, which marks the boundary between their properties. Thorbjorn had brought lots of animals with him to his new farmland, and they began to stray across the river each day, and they grazed on that land which belonged to Refr's family. So Refr's father, Stein, approached Thorbjorn one day and had a word with him. He said, "Our relationship with one another as neighbours has generally been good since you moved here, though I know you've got a bad reputation and you're very unpopular across the rest of Iceland. However, your animals have been crossing the river into my land and grazing my fields. I want this to stop now. Watch your animals more closely. Treat me fairly as your neighbour. In turn, I shall treat you fairly. I'll even support you in any quarrels you may have in future." Now, Thorbjorn had never been spoken to like this before, in a calm and reasonable manner, with sensible, logical arguments put forward. He thought that if more people had treated him like this in the past, maybe he wouldn't have committed such unpopular and violent manslaughters. He agreed. He would keep closer watch on his livestock, and he'd stop them crossing the river and grazing Stein's land, out of respect for his neighbour. Things seemed really well, at least for a while, until one day Stein fell desperately ill. He knew he would never recover from this illness and he would soon die, leaving his wife and son alone. He told his wife that he was worried that once he was dead, their neighbour Thorbjorn would no longer respect the agreements he had made with Stein. He urged her, sell up the land, move west, go live with your brother instead. Stein died shortly after this. Now Thorgerd loved her home. She thought the land was rich and beautiful. She decided to stay. She would keep farming there with her son. However, after Stein's death, their neighbour Thorbjorn became quite the nuisance again. He allowed his animals to cross the river and eat huge amounts of grass on Thorgerd's land. The fields were overgrazed, they were utterly devastated by large numbers of rampant, hungry animals crossing the river each day. This sadly meant Thorgerd could not stock up enough food to feed her animals over the bitterly freezing cold Icelandic winter. She had to slaughter her animals instead, rather than watch them starve, and naturally she became poorer as a result. She told Thorbjorn, "Stop letting your animals cross that river," but he refused to do anything about it. He showed her none of the respect she deserved. She desperately tried to sell her land to someone else, but of course no one wanted Thorbjorn as their terrible neighbour, so she was stuck there. Thorgerd, though, she was a clever woman. She decided if her neighbour would not watch the animals, she would have to hire someone to keep watch over them on her behalf. So what she did was at the next spring assembly, she sought out a man named Barthie the Short. He was sharp-sighted, he was swift-footed, he could run as fast as a horse, and best of all, he was reliable, he was honest, and he had an excellent reputation. She explained the situation to him, she offered him a very generous sum of money, and he eagerly accepted the job. So what Barthie did was he built himself a home at the very edge of Thorgerd's land, where that river was, and he successfully stopped all of Thorbjorn's animals from crossing that river. He didn't harm them, he never trespassed into Thorbjorn's land. Barthie was happy with his job, and Thorgerd was happy that her farm was healthy and productive again. All seemed well, at least for a while. But then, the bloodshed began.